First of all, I just want to say thank you for reading our book. I hope you enjoyed it in your book club discussion. So I was asked to do a live interview, but our schedules didn't quite work out. I am a history teacher in Lebanon, Missouri, and we're getting started with our school year and all that fun stuff. So instead, we compromised on this video. So I hope I can answer most of your questions, and if you still have questions, please send me an email and I can share that information with you. One of the main questions most people ask is, how was it meeting Irena? And it is a very difficult question to answer, and it's hard to put into words because this is somebody we did so much research on, and she became our hero and idol, somebody that we really looked up to. And so when you're a teenager, 15, 16 years old like we were, getting to meet your hero, there's no words for it. So the best way I can say is all those fun words, the excitement, the energy, the expectations, all of that wrapped into one. It was so exciting. I will tell you though, in perfect Irena style, she wouldn't let us meet her for the first couple of days when we went to Poland, which was a little irritating, a little aggravating. As teenagers, our whole purpose was to go fly to Poland and meet our hero. But instead, in her 90s, she came up with an itinerary, a 10-page itinerary of things she wanted us to do while we were in Poland. And there was 2 or 3 days at the very beginning of our trip that we didn't get to see her. So then the anticipation just built even more, of course. So finally, the day came. We were able to visit her. She at the time was living with her daughter-in-law. Her son had passed away, actually in the fall of 1999, just right as we first discovered her story. Her son-in-law had passed away. And so she was with that family. Her son had passed away. She was with her daughter-in-law and her granddaughter. Lived with them in a small 2-bedroom apartment. And when we first arrived, we were greeted by the daughter-in-law, and we said, there's some snacks and drinks. Why don't you guys go wash up? Irena's in the back. She had been resting. She still had a lot of health complications because of the abuse that had happened to her during the war. And so we, in anticipation, we're in the bathroom washing our hands, and all of a sudden we hear this tiny voice from a room behind us, and it was Irena, and she's saying our names. And a few of our parents and grandparents got to join us, and I remember Megan's mother got to join us, and she's naming naming us, and she gets to Megan's mother and says, Megan, mama. And it was just so perfect, to have that experience. But so we got to meet her. We hugged her right there in the hallway. It was very crowded, but we couldn't resist. So then we all came into the living room, and she sat us down, and she sat in her chair, and we kind of like she was our grandma, we sat around her feet, and for 2 hours or more, she just talked and explained to us of her experiences in the war. And everything she told us, though, she always said we or my group or us. She never said me or I. It was always her people that helped her with all these rescues. Even though she was the mastermind behind it, she was the one that organized it, she never gave credit just to herself. It was always the people that helped her, because in her mind, it was more of a risk for them to be helping her than if it was just her on her own. So anyway, it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. So that was our very first experience. I had gone to Poland 2 more times after that, and I remember very vividly the very last visit I was able to have with her. At that point, we had raised enough money to keep her in her own, or in a nursing home, a Catholic nursing home, where she had her own room for the first time ever. She didn't have to share with anyone. And also, she had all this memorabilia from us. We were Kansas girls, so we always sent her lots of sunflower things. And so she kind of had this area in the side of her room that had all of her Kansas girl stuff. We sat with her and talked with her, and at that point, she was, I think it was around a year or so before she passed away. And she was still very vibrant, very energetic. Memory was so solid. We just had a good visit. And I'm not a very emotional person, as you read in the book. I'm, kind of different in that fact. And after we spoke with her that time, when we were leaving, I just broke down and cried. Nothing crazy, but I just cried, and my friends noticed. They're like, "What's going on with you, Liz?" And I just thought, like, somewhere in my heart, I just knew that was my last time with her. And so it was just kind of a nice closure for me to have that very intimate experience. And also somehow I knew that was my last time, and it was. Another question I get, we all get very often is, how was it meeting these child survivors? And the one that stands out the most, of course, is Elżbieta Fikowska's story. She was only 6 months old when she was rescued. She has no memory of that, but she always had the silver spoon with her, and she always was happy to share it with us and show us. But just being able to be around the people that Irena saved was just something so special. If it wasn't for Irena, we wouldn't even be here talking with these people. But Elżbieta's story is always very remarkable. Another thing is during our first trip, we had a whole day where we just interviewed child survivors. Some of them were from Irena, some of them were just child survivors, and they told us their stories. And we also got to interview rescuers. A lot of the people we interviewed actually were children or teenagers, and their parents had organized the rescue somehow. And those stories were just remarkable. One story in particular, this man, he lived outside of the city in Warsaw. They had a small farm, and they had a barn, and they saved 2 boys. They were brothers. However, the way they saved him was actually digging out part of the dirt floor in the barn, and they stayed there. They had to lay down. For 2 years, they stayed like that. And the boy would go out for his evening chores, and he would share food. They didn't have a lot to share, but they'd share food, or he'd go feed the pigs and always have some extra food for the boys. And he was telling the story, and he said, but the most, interesting part about the story was when the war was over, everything was said and done, we got the boys out, but they couldn't walk because they had been laying for 2 years. They never got to get out, and their muscles pretty well deteriorated. So they had to relearn how to walk because of the situation they were in. And it was just so, eye-opening to think like, oh yeah, you couldn't do anything during that time. If a neighbor even thought you were hiding Jews, then you would be killed for it. So it was just such a big burden for such a young boy at the time. He was around 10 or 12. And for him to have to keep a secret, and knowing that there's a couple other boys out in the barn he could potentially play with, but you couldn't do any of that. They had to be in secret. They talked, they told stories, but they couldn't get up out of their little hiding spot. So anyway, just being able to interview these people and have this history come to life. This is one of the reasons why I'm a history teacher. I'm hoping to inspire this type of travel in other people to go to these places that you hear about in your history classes and experience the world, experience these historical places, interview people. I don't care if it's your parents, your grandparents, whoever it is. Interview people who are primary sources for these different time periods that you get to learn about in school. So another unique experience that we had was being able to visit the tree, the apple tree that Irena buried the jars at. There's a woman who lives there now named Hannah. She was actually a young girl, preteen, who lived there whenever Irena would come to put extra names in the jars. Irena acted as the house gardener. She was a close friend with the family anyway, and she acted as a house gardener, and she would go and garden and have access to the jars. And true Irena style again, she was burying these jars under the apple tree, and across the alleyway, German barracks. Anyway, so Hannah, she still lives there. She grew up in the house, and she took it over after her parents passed. And she and her husband are artists. And something unique that she kept was that on the outside of their house, they live in like a townhouse type of structure, townhouse rows. All of them have been redone, modernized, but hers sits close to the middle of the row, still has the bullet holes from the war time period. Warsaw was just pummeled during the war, both by the Germans, by the Russians. And so as kind of a historical and art piece, the outside of their house still has the bullet holes. So anyway, just to kind of give you some imagery of their house. And in the back is still the apple tree. It doesn't produce fruit anymore, but it's still there. And so you can visit there and see where she buried these jars at. And it's just a special place that Hannah is still living there and kept that in their family. When we first visited them, our first trip, we were walking along the sidewalk, and there is a lady a couple houses down. And she was messing in her garden in her front yard and popped up and asked our interpreters, like, what's going on here? Because we had a good group of people coming down this residential sidewalk. And they talked back and forth, and you could tell something was, something interesting in the conversation. And the interpreter said, interesting story. This lady grew up here too, and her parents also saved a Jewish girl. And it was just a couple doors down, and nobody knew because you couldn't tell. If you told a soul what you were doing, it's a death notice. So just interesting things like that happened a lot of time whenever we would visit different places. People would, obviously now be open to tell that. But even after the war, for years, you couldn't talk about it. Irena herself was put on a blacklist on the communists when they took over Poland. So it's just interesting all of our unique little experiences, and I know you read a lot of that in the book. And of course, one of the biggest experiences beyond meeting Irena and the children was going to Treblinka and going to Auschwitz. Treblinka was the death camp that if you were in the Warsaw Ghetto, that's where you were sent. It's just 30 minutes outside of town. And just being there. We went with Elżbieta's daughter. Elżbieta couldn't go. Just emotionally, it was too hard for her knowing that her parents, or at least her mother, died there. She did find out later that her father had actually resisted the Nazis at Umschlagplatz, which is the train station that took these people to Treblinka. And he was killed there. And they had been separated. The wife and husband, of course, had been separated, so she didn't have any idea that he didn't even make it on the train. But anyway, her death would have been at Treblinka. So Elżbieta's daughter came with us, and very emotional time to be with a family member of somebody who actually died. Treblinka is a very unique experience because there's nothing there besides the gas chamber that has been filled in. And so as a memorial, they have these rocks all over, and each of those rocks have a name of a Jewish town in Poland that was destroyed. And then it's surrounded by a cedar wood forest. It's just a very unique experience. We also visited Auschwitz, and nothing like it. The first time we went, we got a private tour, so nobody else was there. We were there. We could take our time, look at everything, and just being able to kind of soak that in. And again, being right where history is there's nothing like it. If any of you have traveled or visited in any type of historical site, you know what I'm talking about, that feeling. So when you're there, it's just unbelievable knowing so many people had died right here where you're at. All the horrible things, the acts of terror, all of that happening just right there where you're at. There's just nothing like it. Another interesting fact, a couple years ago, my husband and I took one of those DNA tests. And I didn't think I'd ever find anything kind of fun and unique, but everyone just hopes to do it. So I found out that I'm actually 0.7, which isn't much, but 0.7% Ashkenazi Jew. So it's just interesting to see that I did this project. I was just very interested in the Holocaust. We've been able to do all these really unique, or have all these really unique experiences. And then I also have some DNA related to it. So that's my newest personal connection. Hopefully I've answered some of your questions. And if you want to email me any more questions, I'll be glad to get back with you.